of specific directions on how to launch it, how to get it set up and launch it. He does this. He'll come in and set it all up, so all I have to do is bang, go. But I need him to give me the knowledge of knowing what to do. Am I on?
Yep.
Okay, I did. All right. Good. Good. All right. Well, let's look at lesson 5 then, Paul's agreement with the apostles. Now, what's interesting here, I think, and this is just one man's observation, but last week we talked in our lesson about the gospel. That was the essence of the lesson, Paul's message, the gospel. And we talked about what is the gospel and so on and so forth. That was more or less if you please, a doctrinal treatment of that particular message or that particular theme. Here, he's still talking about, if you look at the second bullet point under the objectives, explain the importance and impact of one gospel. The gospel is still the core or at the heart of what's going on here in this passage, chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. But he's moved from a doctrinal treatment to an event. So here's this event that's taking place, or that has taken place. It's not the Jerusalem Council, as he points out in his first big major point, the timing of this visit. All of Galatians, if you please, occurs between chapters 14 and 15 of the book of Acts. Right. The Jerusalem Council isn't until Acts 15. So this is still, as he points out at the very bottom of the first page, a time of learning and transition. Even though this is, as he points out, 14 years after Paul's first initial visit to Jerusalem. So it's an interesting time frame. And it's later. Paul's been on his first missionary journey. He's been dealing with a problem. The Jerusalem Council hasn't occurred yet. But this was kind of like a small, as he points out top of the second page, a small precursor to the meeting which is to follow in Acts 15. So he asked the question here, and I think there's some very good discussion questions, whether you choose to use them as indicated or not. If Paul didn't need the help of the church, Jerusalem church, for 14 years, why meet with them now? What did he hope to gain? And I could have a great discussion there, and then I've noted in my notes, I can move right from there into, well, let's talk about the tone and the intent of the meeting, because the intent really answers that question. So at any rate, you got a little bit on timing. This is not a major point, and you won't see an objective that speaks to it, but you kind of have to set the table. It's only the first verse. Kind of gives you a sense of, okay, what's going on? So this whole passage is about a meeting that Paul is having with the church leaders in Jerusalem. And that's what basically the first verse is telling you. The tone and the intent are the key points. And if you look at the first objective, explain the timing, tone, and intent of Paul's visit to Jerusalem regarding the Gentile question, is how I worded it. But I think the tone and the intent are certainly important points that you want to draw out. I almost feel like for someone who does breakout very well, you could use these, you could set this up as you want you all to come together and talk about you can talk about the timing as a general discussion. Yeah. But one of you talk about the tone. So read verses 2 through 6 and use these discussion questions as the questions that they're going to address or that they're going to answer in their discussion. The intent could be somebody else's. There's not a discussion question. Well, there is, excuse me. Over on the top of pages, C4, I think it is. There's a couple there. So you could almost use those questions as fodder for your discussion groups. And then one group would deal with the results, verses 7 through 9. This, again, is a very expositional treatment of this entire thing. You know, it's just going down through it almost verse by verse, looking at the passage, and it tells you what's going on or what Paul is thinking. But the intent of this thing is to understand, again, the whole reason for this meeting is to solidify this point of what is the gospel, okay? What is the true gospel? What is the one gospel? And you all read the passage. I know the outcome of it, but there's a lot that's being said and a lot that's being done as you go through this passage. Paul's not intimidated. He's very confident in what he's doing. He's very independent, unyielding. He's very secure in his calling, very secure in his knowledge that his message was from God. So none of this bothered him. He didn't really care if, to an extent, I think it's verse 6, where he says, I really don't care who they were. The point is, this is the truth. Okay. I think what's interesting here is that he brought Titus with him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's an interesting point. A pastor referred to him as Exhibit A.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the questions, or one of the points that he makes here, is the difference between Titus and Timothy.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting.
It is.
Interesting dichotomy. Looking at these two, Titus, as he points out, Titus could have deferred, but he didn't. Timothy could have stood on principle like Titus, but didn't. Both decisions have one goal in common: the advance of the gospel. Different situations, different environment, different circumstances. They each handled it a different way, but with the same intent in mind. Okay, and so the discussion question I thought was a very strong one. When should we defer, and when should we defy? I guess basically what you're saying. Boy, that's a great question. Think about that. But this thing kind of it's fairly expositional. It flows. I think the discussion questions can lead you down the path of each of these points that you're trying to make. So if you leverage them or think about them, and maybe you reword them a little bit. The two on the page, it's the page 1. I'm sorry, these aren't numbered. I should probably number them. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's page 5 that are under number 2. Not as strong to me. If I were to, Pastor and I were talking about that with next week's lesson. You got way too many discussion questions. So I said, okay, these two can be combined. They're really the same question. This one has nothing to do with the objectives. I just take this one out, and so on and so forth. So if I'm looking at questions and I'm trying to match them up to the objectives of the lesson, that's kind of how I decide, okay, am I going to use that one or not? Nothing wrong with having them in there. If time were allowed, we could do them. I added one. I don't think it's in your notes, okay? But when you look at that second bullet, and it states, okay, one of the objectives of this lesson, and I think it's very important, explain the importance and impact of one gospel. That's what this is all about. Whether we're talking about last week's lesson, we're talking about this week's lesson,
right.
And what's not written in there, his conclusion, he says, Paul's apostleship message came to him from God, independent of other apostles. That's the point of chapter 1. But his message was identical to the message of the apostles. That's kind of the twist on this lesson. There is only one gospel. And I wrote the question, as we consider the key messages from last week and this week, what is the significance or importance of one gospel? Why is it so important? Why can't we have, in the main, we have the gospel, and you think you want to do this and you think you want to do that? Why can't we? As long as we all agree that in the main, that kind of a mentality. We talked a little bit about that last week's lesson. Once you deviate, you basically water it down, you change it. It's a false gospel. But nonetheless, I think that's a good question, maybe a good way to end this study. He's argued from a doctrinal standpoint. He went to Jerusalem. He met with the authorities. He discussed it. Of course, it turned out well here. It turned out well. There was a handshake, basically, an agreement that Peter's going to minister to the Jews. Paul's going to minister to the Gentiles. We believe that we believe in the same message, okay? And then the only thing that was asked was this point of Christian charity, the last verse there. But again, the essence of this, there is a specific timing to this meeting. There's a specific tone to this meeting. There's a specific intent to this meeting. And there were specific results from the meeting. Okay. So I think those are the things that, I think it teaches itself. But I also can see, like I said, if I word these questions or use these questions properly, I can lead people right through this lesson without doing a whole lot of teaching. Because I'm asking them to look at a passage or look at a couple of verses. And what is that verse telling us relative to the timing, relative to the tone, relative to the intent of this meeting? They'll pick it right out of the verse. He doesn't deviate. He doesn't give you a lot of well, it could have been this or it could have been that. He just takes what's said in the verse and just pulls it out. So again, I think you could, whether you put them in groups and ask them to research it for themselves, whether you use a large group approach and just throw the question out there. You tell me what you see, tell me what you read. Okay, or we'll read it together, and then I want to ask you some questions. So pay attention, whatever. Have you had any chance to think about it? Give some thought to it yet, Bill? As far as
No, I've only read through it. I haven't
Okay.
actually dove into this right here.
Okay.
I mean, you're right. It would lend itself to group. I mean, last week I did the groups, and basically, I modified the handout, the completed handout.
Okay. Yeah.
What I mean by modified is it lent itself to 3 groups. So the group only got the information for their group.
Okay.
For that
particular
the defined, the 3 Ds, the defined,
defiled,
defiled and defended.
defended.
Right. So they had those piece of papers, but we were doing this off of I had a definition theme. So we were defining things. So I started off the meeting with, we played the dictionary game, where to try to illustrate, do we really know what's true and what's not true, just based on, and when we actually were able, it was interesting because I had them in three groups, and the group came up with different definitions and the other groups voted on which one they thought was the correct definition. And only one group got one right, everything else was wrong. Nobody got it. And so we were able to use that to say, so why did you think it was that definition? What was your point of reference? Well, how did you even make the decision? And which really led into the 3 things. And then we broke into the groups, and they got to take a look at that. We pulled it together. So I didn't really have to, because in the past I've usually have to pulling a bunch of verses. I'm trying to get them to look up stuff and everything. But on their sheets that they get, which I do with the groups, they had to define 2 things. Like one of them was the the Gentiles, which one was it? It was the 2 where it was distorted. Anyway, I just had them, each group had 2 things they either had to define or explain based on it. So I followed that, define this thing. And then I took the discussion question. Because I had taken it off their sheet, because they didn't have it. They didn't have it because it's not on the outline, but it was on their little card. So I said, I want you to define these 2 things, and I want you to answer the question. And it was a simple thing, because I actually spent a lot of time, I spent more time than I meant to, on the recap, bringing it up, because I had a timeline on the board, and I went down the timeline and said, okay, which brings us to this, So, I just got to think about what am I going to. I got to wrap my head around chapter 2, to tell you the truth.
Right.
Is if I can wrap my head around the purpose of this, because I've already read through this once, and I'm already thinking, you feel like you've already delivered the punchline, right? Well, because chapter 1 delivered the punchline as far as the reason for his letter was like, how can you do this? But so now reading through this, I'm trying to figure out, okay, so he's spending more time to explain. To tell you the truth, what I'm going to have to do is reread Galatians again, the whole thing, to see, because I've kind of gotten just pigeonholed into what I'm looking at, the one thing, and now I need to look at the bigger picture.
Context.
What's the whole thing? What he's trying to say? Because he really hasn't gotten to the point yet.
We haven't gotten to justification by faith.
Yeah.
Which is the real essence.
That's the real essence.
That's the core.
Right.
I think there's at least 2 lessons that center on that. That's later in the book.
Yeah, right.
Center of the book, pretty much.
So I just need to regroup on this. I mean, my thing is like always coming in and doing groups.
Yeah.
That can get stale after a while.
True.
Right, because even this last one is like, okay, we're in the group, but lately I've always had new people. I had like more new people
coming and going, huh?
Well, visitors.
Yeah. Okay.
The funny thing was one of the college students that I had last week, because Joe had to do double duty. When his parents were in town visiting, and he walked his parents over to my room and says, "You want to be in this class?"
Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
I was like, okay. Come on in. And as his parents they were just in town visiting him. And so,
like I said, the from a connectivity standpoint, this really connects, even though when you look at the layout of Galatians, again, take the chapters and verses out of it.
Yeah.
He really talks about the message before he talks about his apostleship, but we've presented it in reverse order.
Right. more
So-
as a background type of presentation,
And
right?
really, like I said, last week's lesson really focused on the gospel message. What is it?
Mhm.
Why is it important? Why does it need to be just this message? This really does the same thing, but it does it from a different perspective. This is an event. So he's recapping an event.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like in the first chapter, if you look at it this way, the gospel, there's only one gospel. And if you're questioning, this is my authority to deliver that. And oh, by the way, I've got the endorsement, chapter 2, verses 1 to 10. I've got the endorsement
Right.
of these church
Right.
leaders. So
Not that he needed it.
not
but-
that I needed it. And he makes that point.
Right.
Not that I needed it, but it's one more layer to the credibility of the message. I guess that's really what
and
we're
one more
talking
layer to quiet the
Yes.
naysayers.
Exactly. And he's
And-
still, and he, just like he attacked the false teachers last week, he's attacking them again this week.
Because evidently they were present during this meeting.
That's it. They
Right.
came in. In fact, I think he says they came in like spies.
Yeah.
Like they were more, he didn't know they were going to be there.
Yeah.
And he didn't know how they got in there, but they were there.
Right.
And challenging him, and challenging his authority, challenging his message.
Yeah.
And he deals with them in verses 4 and 5.
Yeah.
So, you know, like the thing is, it's almost like a continual story. So to your point, go back and look at it,
Right.
and it's continuum. But to me, it's just a natural stepping off from last week. I can connect to last week
Yeah.
really easy.
Is there, I haven't had a chance to look it up, but is there any other reference to this meeting? Possibly like on Peter's part or anything like that? Do
I
we know of in the
don't-
Bible?
I don't think so. At least there's nothing written here. And
Right.
the books that I've been reading, because when I do, what I do is he sends me this lesson,
Mhm.
and I know the passage, and I'll go pull some books, and I'll be reading
Mhm.
other writers, because you know we add some quotes, by the way. I think you've noticed that
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
back. They are there solely for
Yeah.
if you want to use them. These are
Yeah,
additional
Sometimes there's a
helpful.
little spark in there, and you're like, oh,
Yeah, I like that. I want to pull that in and use it. I did that in my lesson. I thought, I'm gonna pull this one in and use it in the slide to kind of reinforce this point.
Mhm.
But I haven't seen anything anywhere that alludes to another place
yeah.
where either Peter or someone else.
Right. I mean, the
alludes to
only thing he actually alludes to is the book of Titus,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But Titus doesn't actually refer to this meeting that he
No.
went with Paul to go meet the leaders of Jerusalem. I don't know. I didn't. It's probably nothing as far as pertinent to what we're saying here. But sometimes I like being able to say, and this relates to this, like when we were talking about this, it was fun to pull in Acts and read that
Yes.
section of Acts. We're
Yeah.
like, okay,
Mhm.
this is the time period where this is written,
Mhm.
like we just said. It's in this area, and I think it just helps,
Put it in
the whole
context.
thing. Yeah,
Okay.
there's a So I mean, Acts covers a whole bunch of time,
Yes, it
right?
does. Yeah.
And to see that there's one book that was written during that what Acts is
Mhm.
covering,
Mhm.
and there's probably a couple more too, but
Mhm. Mhm.
right? So
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Because he goes to prison.
yeah,
And during
right.
that time frame, he's writing the
He's
prison
writing,
epistles. Yeah.
yeah.
So, but this is his, again,
Okay.
this is his first epistle. At least as
Right.
near as anyone can tell, this is the first one he wrote.
Mhm.
And it falls right in there in between 14 and 15, which kind of interesting because it just shows you the length of time that Acts covers. It covers a
It
huge
does.
period of time, whereas, this is kind of a compressed area or is time period. And I don't know how long it took him to write this. I don't know. That's always the way they wrote.
Was this like at one sitting?
Yeah, it's not like he just sat down and said, "Okay, I'm going to start writing." I have a feeling
Let's
this
knock
kind of
thing out.
took a while to come together. But last week I had fun with it. I said, just imagine, because you read that first part of the chapter, and he's got the amen at the end of it. It's a doxology. And I said, can you imagine what it was like in the church when this guy got up to read this, whether it was the pastor or the leader of the church, and he's reading along and he's all excited, and all of a sudden the church is all excited and they're high-fiving each other and shouting amen, and music director gets up and starts off on, all hail the power of Jesus' name. And then the guy that's reading the letter, while they're all doing that, he's looking down and then, I am astonished. You can imagine the look on his face when he's going, so it just, how quickly he went from amen to astonished. I said, granted, that's the English version, but the same concept, but at any rate.
This wasn't part of the lesson, but as I read through it, one of the thoughts that came to my mind was how grateful as a non-Jewish Christian I am for Paul, right? And his burden to bring the gospel to the Gentiles. That's not what this lesson is teaching. Also, I'm not trying to take it out of context, but it just struck me that he really, it was us. We're all Christians. We're all part of the body of Christ. And he really helped to push that message that you need to go to the Gentiles as well.
I'm not so sure that's so far off of what this lesson is trying to. I mean, that's the whole. This is the liberty.
Yeah, I think the lesson. Yeah, I guess what I'm thinking is he clearly was focused on the Jews and helping them understand why he was doing what he was doing. But yeah, I can see your point.
I'm curious to see as this moves forward to what extent or to what end that becomes more of a message that's impacted. I mean, we see it, to your point, it's there, but whether we stress it or deal with it, what if there wasn't a Paul?
Yeah.
God had a plan. And his plan wasn't for a Jew to go.
Paul never wrote this letter.
Exactly.
Right.
What if? Yeah, a bunch of what ifs. But God knew that there was a certain individual he had in mind, and they had to be a certain type of individual. When you study Paul's education, when you study Paul's background, and his, and so on and so forth, he was the unique person that was the right person for this particular responsibility. So it is quite fascinating.
Yeah.
And then, we've already talked a little bit about just how he wrote this letter versus how he writes some of his later epistles.
So a thought just came into my mind as far as, because he's referring to a meeting that he had in this letter. So this meeting has already occurred.
Yes.
Because sometimes it's easy to start reading this to think that he's actually recounting events as they go on, which that's the point of Acts. Acts recounts the events.
Yes.
Although when Acts was written, everything had already happened, but it was a recounting. Right?
Yes, I don't think Luke sat down and just was recording day by day.
He wasn't the scribe on the trip. Right.
Although
he
but the way it reads, you kind of feel like
you feel like you're seeing.
So we don't want to look at this part of it where he's talking about an event as, he found out about the Galatians, that they were, and he was appalled or whatever. And then he decided to go to.
As a result of that,
right.
No.
See, that's what I think is what kind of tripped me up, is like because you get used to thinking about things being like chronological, linear. And now he's saying because he talks about the fact that he was called not by man, and no man made him, and all that kind of stuff. And now we're getting into, okay, I've made that point, but in case there was any doubts. By the by, I have been to Jerusalem, and I have talked to the brethren.
In addition to my own calling,
right?
I have the endorsement. If you think of this, these are endorsements,
right?
Right. But you're right. I think all of his writing was compressed to a very small time frame, even though we took quite a while to write it. It was still compressed to a very small time frame. Everything that he's writing about this event and anything else of it had already occurred.
Right, but so here's where I'm going with this, is that if that's already occurred, and those Judaizers were in that meeting, the spies. I mean, and so they heard this message as well.
Yeah.
Which adds to his even more amazement that there are still people out there who are trying to do it after they had already heard the meeting. Right? Is that?
Yeah.
Am I on the right track with that?
Well, his point under on what page again? I'm sorry about the pages. 1, 2, 3, page 4, number 3. Paul met with Jerusalem leaders to oppose false brothers. They were dishonest. Okay. And he makes the point, these men claimed to be Jewish Christians, but they were Jews, not Christians. So, he's taking a very strong line here these aren't of the fold. These aren't Christians.
Right.
He's calling them for what they are. And if you remember last week, he kind of closed with that thought. Let them be accursed. Let them be damned. You know, these aren't
Right.
Christians. And so he's calling them out here or in this meeting.
Right.
And they are still around.
But right. So they were in this meeting that occurred prior to this letter being written.
A group of them were.
A group of them. There's probably a different group, who knows, but
that's it. Yeah, I don't know.
Or it could be the same group, but that this is still going on. And see, and then this, I mean, he took Titus with him before this letter was written. So where was Titus actually from? Was he a Galatian, or is he just a one of his or is he just a Gentile convert that he brought along? Because it says protect Gentile converts, but was Titus a Galatian? I don't know. I mean, was he an elder in a church? Was he? I'd have to look. See, that's what I'm talking about. I gotta get more background on the players that are
Titus.
Because now we've introduced a new person here.
Yeah, that's true.
Titus. Well, not a new person, but you know what I'm saying.
I was just saying.
In the book, because we already talked about other characters. Now there's Titus. I mean, what was, and because we're actually going to look at what was the purpose of Titus being at this meeting. But so this is, I think initially when I was looking at this is what was messing me up, was like, is this something that now he's referring to? But wait, he wrote this letter, so this is an event that already occurred, and that he's already made this argument about the Gentiles and that there's one gospel, and now they're writing Galatians. Huh.
Don't strain a brain.
No, man, I'm about to pop a vein here. But it's really kind of, it's actually blowing my mind, actually. Is like, wait. So how am I going to wrap my mind around that Paul is talking about events that have already occurred?
Mm-hmm. And
this isn't one of those movies where they go back and forth between future and past. This has already occurred. How can... There's a significance to this, though. There's a significance, is what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
I mean, because the way this was initially presented, or the way I read it and everything, we're not really focusing on the fact that this was an event that had already occurred. We're just taking it for what it's worth, as far as Paul's referring to this in a letter to his tone and intent of him going to Jerusalem. But his intent of going to Jerusalem was before this Galatian letter.
Yes. The problem existed. Yeah. So
exactly. This isn't something that happened in Galatia, or is it something that happened in Galatia which prompted this? And now he's writing the letter back to them, recapping.
Well, I look at this one. He was converted, chapter 9. And go back to this little key table here.
Right.
His first trip, which occurred, I think, fairly shortly. I can't remember now. I have to go look and see where it is. But in one of these lessons, maybe it's in the third lesson. Maybe his first trip to Jerusalem, occurred shortly after his conversion. Then this is his second trip. This is 14 years after this trip. In that 14-year period, he's come up here.
Second trip to Jerusalem, you're saying.
Exactly, to Jerusalem. His first missionary journey took him up in here, to Galatia. He comes back. He doesn't go back to Jerusalem. He comes back to here. Okay. So he's here. He feels the need because of this problem, which I gather was known. I don't know how much he knew about the attack on the churches at that point. And then the time frame between coming here and going to Jerusalem, 14 years. So I don't know how long. I have to go back and look at a timeline. How long did this take? How long was he back here before he met in Jerusalem?
Well, I mean, if you look at this, I mean, this shows he originated from Jerusalem, his first missionary journey. Right? This little thing starts at Jerusalem, and he goes up through Antioch.
I'm not sure he came out of Jerusalem. I thought he came out of Antioch.
Well, I mean, I'm just looking at this. What's this arrow then?
I don't know. It's a good question.
That's a good question.
Good question.
Because does it end here, or where is the start? Is the start here at Tarsus, where he's from, right?
I'm thinking it started here at Antioch. But at any rate.
Well, that's beside the point.
Yeah. He was on the road to Damascus.
Right.
So, he was converted. He ends up in Antioch. He's in the church there. He's commissioned there.
Right.
He goes out and comes back. it says to Caesarea, it looks like. Or maybe
Oh,
that's
there's another
his
little line down
second,
there.
that's his second journey over here. Maybe that was it. But at any rate, I'd have to study that a little bit closer myself.
Right.
But the bottom line is there's a time frame that's occurred here.
Uh-huh.
And where he's first made aware of this problem, when that problem first reared its ugly head, because it talks about the fact that it was an ongoing problem. It wasn't something that just cropped up.
Mm-hmm.
And then at what point, all we know is that he was back in Jerusalem 14 years. 14 years elapsed between his first trip and his second trip.
Right.
Okay, and then his trip to Galatia was in between these two as well,
Mm-hmm.
and his first missionary journey. So I'd have to go back and map that myself to see
Right.
exactly. But
Right. Look
to
at a few
your
more
point,
maps. Right.
all of this occurred prior to his writing a letter.
Right. Right. I mean,
And-
did he, was his plan all along with his journey was wrapping up and going to Jerusalem because he took Titus with him. And this is before he's referring to this in his letter to Galatia.
Yeah,
So-
he took Titus
so-
with him to
right.
Jerusalem, right?
Right. Or was the news about what was going on in Galatia what prompted him to go to Jerusalem, take Titus with him, have this conversation, and then he pens because he
I
pens
follow
the
your
letter.
thought.
Right. You see what I'm saying?
It makes
So,
logical sense.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that all this happened without knowing about Galatia. I mean, for me, there's some significance to that, and because we've kind of already talked a little bit about what prompted all this need for this.
Well, according to this, and again, I'd have to study this map. His second trip was in Acts 11.
Yeah.
That's what he's writing about here. He doesn't pen this until roughly the end of Acts 14, between 14 and 15. So there's a time frame here.
Well, but that's when he writes it.
Yeah.
To write it. So,
Right. And he says problems with Antioch. I could go look at that, but maybe that's what
yeah, but that's not till 15. So
Yeah.
that's after he wrote the letter, the
That's
problems
true.
in Antioch.
That's true. That's true. Which prompted then
Have to go to a meeting.
Understood. Understood.
All right.
Okay.
So, but before you take off, Adam, as far as the calendar.
Yeah.
Yep.
We're
Okay.
good.
Well,
You got another
I got
date?
another date. I only gave you the date that I knew that I was going to be gone. I didn't give you the date that Sandy knew I was going to be gone, or things. So that she's made plans. Actually, do you have me on here yet? Yeah, Bill Roush. This Sunday as well, the 19th.
22nd and
No,
or
the 12th and the
19th.
19th.
Okay. All right.
I can do that.
Can you? Sure you?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
No,
I don't mind. That's why
no.
I'm wanting you to stay. I'm like, if you can.
No, because I'll have the 12th free for my trustee meeting.
Yes, you will.
The 19th.
All right. I'll pencil you in.
That's President's Day weekend.
Right.
Yes, it is.
Right.
Because there's no school Monday.
There's no
Okay.
school.
Yep.
All right.
I can. I'm not sure I'll be at the Wednesday night meeting. I gotta double check. I can't remember,
Right.
but I can definitely do the 19th.
I appreciate it. That makes it easy.
No problem.
All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Adam.
Thank you very
All
much.
right.
All right. I'll review this and I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks a lot. Anything else you want to talk about?
Well, we can turn this thing off.
We can, yeah, I think we can, because there's not a whole lot more we can,
Right.
just the two of us. I don't know if there's a lot more that we can give anybody that's watching it, if they're watching it.
I guess I can't. It's not-
Yeah, you had to pull it down. There you go.